Well, I'm quite pleased, if not impressed, with the turnout on this awful winter night, you know. This is the winter that will drive us all south, no doubt about it. So, but I do appreciate you coming out, and I hope there'll be an instructive or entertaining or interesting evening for you. As you know, and as my friend Jane Pilla has told many of you on the web, through emails, I've written a novel called The Medallion. And I know some of you have wished me congratulations on my success. I never think of it as being that successful. I started out to write a book and never thought I would even finish it. And then I finished it in 2012 and didn't think I'd find a publisher. And then in 2013, I found a publisher. And in 2014, December, it was published so I guess that is, success, I guess. Let me give you a little anecdote. I have a list of places that I sent requests, queries to publish this book. I sent to agents and I sent to publishers. It adds up to 275. And 104, I kept details, 104 were kind enough to say no, all right? The rest didn't even bother. And as far as agents go, I've yet to have an agent, most of the agents who are looking for new writers and new material are fairly young, in their 20s, and they're looking for compatriots of their own age, and particularly somebody in their 20s or 30s, because they would have a long career to write a lot of books and make them a lot of money. And I even had one agent ask to see my picture. All right, so I didn't get that agent, and for many other reasons, I have my picture on my website and on my books. You know. No, I actually went. This is so interesting because I've never had a professional photograph. I don't know if any of you have. Beyond, I think the last time I had a professional photograph was when I graduated in 1958, and then I got married. When I got married, we had a professional photograph, but other than that, I wouldn't. But I went to the portrait studios in Boston. I had a portrait done, and I think he did a very good job. He said that he only had to use Photoshop in one instance to take the shine off of my... So beyond that, you know, no Photoshop. The wrinkles are there and everything. So, I was telling you about 2009. Oh, let me add this, that this town is always special to me. And I was just thinking the other day, I went and bought apples. And the apples that I bought are Macintosh apples. I always want to have Macintosh apples. And I think, you know, when I was a kid, at the end of Grant Street, in that little area, was an apple orchard. Was it Metcalf?
No.
Metcalf, okay. And we kids used to collect either droppings. We were paid a certain amount for droppings because they were usually bruised, but they could be useful for cider. Or we went up in the trees and pulled them down. And I think we got 35 cents a bushel. I can't remember. I think it was something like that. But I remember that. And they were Macintosh apples. And I can remember distinctly sitting on a hot summer day, actually it would probably been August, given when the things are picked, when the apples are picked, August, September, and leaning back on against one of those wonderful apple trees and taking one of those apples and kind of rubbing off whatever pesticides they put on them. They were powdery white, and then taking a nice big bite of them. And so from this day, it is my favorite apple, and that's the one I always want to get, right? But those, you know, we know what happened to Milford. I mean, the end of Grant Street became a big development area. Post-World War II, people moved in. It was the baby boomers. I was kind of the end of the baby boomer generation, but people came back. They built homes. They had kids, and Milford grew. And all those woods that I grew up in, I mean, you know, you think about how concerned we are about having weapons, particularly among young people. But I can remember walking many a road with my friend's .22 caliber rifle over my shoulder. And we could actually go in, we were kids, we could go in and we could buy .22 caliber. And from, people trusted you that you wouldn't do anything crazy. In fact, the whole of this town was kind of based upon trust. I mean, as a little kid, I would walk the streets. You know, my mother would send me to the supermarket on the corner. They weren't really a supermarket; they were small Stop and Shop, I think. But kids could be trusted at 4 and 5 years old to be out there by themselves. Nobody would harm you, and people were very careful how they drove on the streets. Unfortunately, I don't think that is the case right now. So I have a nostalgia for Milford, and I'm glad to be back here. And I think my appreciation of nature, fishing and being in the woods, started back there when I was a kid, and I grew up in Milford. I think I was very gifted to have that opportunity to grow up in Milford. Now, does that pay off in my stories? I think so, because my characters, one of the elements of my characters, an attribute, is that they appreciate nature. I think Sasha Denisov, who is my character in this book here, the Medallion, he's a Russian immigrant, but you know, he has a feeling for nature. At one point, he survives a near-death experience. I won't ruin it for you, but he nearly gets killed. And when he gets back, he looks out. He's in New Hampshire, looks out through this picture window, and there's snow falling down, snowflakes the size of quarters falling down, and he looks out at it, and he says he just watched the heartless splendor of it. And I like that phrase, heartless splendor. He doesn't think that the world's necessarily a good or bad place, but it's beautiful. It just seems to be heartless in his view of the thing. So we're back to the beginnings of the book. And I'll bring it back to South Station, because South Station's it's almost a character in my novel. First of all, I'd like you to, I printed this off from a website about taxis in Boston. I don't think taxis out here are licensed the same way. We don't have any taxis. Okay. When I grew up, there was a veterans cab. We used to have veterans cab. Yeah, but they don't have them. Okay. But in Boston, there are a lot of them, and if you drive in the city of Boston, you have to have a license, and that license is called the Medallion. And you can see right here it's on the right side of every trunk of a Boston cab. Cambridge City cabs, Waltham. It's not everywhere, but they're there, and it's a metal plate imprinted with a specific number associated with that cab. And it is a license. There's a bureaucracy. Actually, in the city of Boston, it's a subsidiary of the Boston Police Department. And there's a bureaucracy there, and they assign these numbers for people. And they charge a fee to have the medallion. And then when the medallion is in your possession, you can resell it. And they go up and down in price according to demand. And the Boston Magazine had an article about the medallion. In fact, they've had a lot of, Boston Globe had a series of articles on the medallion system. And they've gone up to $700,000 for a medallion, right? But now, and it's something you may want to ask me about later, but with the challenge of the Uber system, where people can call up and they're not licensed cabs, but they offer that service. The price of the medallions have started to decline, and they are on sale now for like $400,000. It's still a lot. It's still a lot of money. And my cab driver, who wants his own medallion, his own business. So we have that theme of somebody who wants to have his own business. Many of us work for other people our whole lives, but there are people who want their own part of life. They want to have control over their own destiny. I had a cousin who was in the TV business when people fixed TVs. This is when they had vacuum tubes in TVs, so it's a long time ago. But he made a living, raised 4 kids, fixing televisions. Now televisions are almost a disposable product, right? But then people try to, PCs were once something that people kept for many years and fixed. Now you can buy them for hundreds of dollars, and it doesn't, life changes, So, all right, so we have this medallion. There are 1,900 medallions in the city of Boston, all right? There are no new medallions right now. When I called the city of Boston to figure out a number for my cabbie that they didn't think they would use for decades or a decade or two, We figured on 3654, 3,000 range, and that's, if he does get his medallion, it'll be a 3,000 medallion. So there they are. Okay, we have that. So now we get to South Station, which I either worked across the street or next to South Station for 17 years. It's a big part of my work experience. I still go to Boston 3 days a week to a writers group, and I go to South Station and pick up my lunch there. I know that's where I go. And the building, I don't know, I mean, it's just something, it's become a fixture in my life. And I've been thinking about it. I know you can't see this very well, but the front of the building is a facade. It's on the corner of Atlantic Avenue and Summer Street. So, and the cabs line up on Atlantic Ave, and some of them move along to Summer Street, dropping people off and picking up some passengers. When my story begins, you'll see that we're on Summer Street at that point, all right? So we have it. And the architecture was built in 1900, and the architecture is what they call neoclassical. There are Roman elements in it, there are Greek elements, there are 8 Doric or Corinthian columns. They suggest strength and stability, and they have a little portico that comes right off of the Parthenon in Greece. And you have all these, you might even have these entranceways, which are arches, might even be from Crusaders, medieval architecture. And my point of it is that what I would like how I interpret all this is that on top of the whole building, if you can, when you go there, is an American eagle. And to me, that kind of summarizes, the architecture kind of summarizes a theme of American culture. That there are elements of Greek and Roman and all kinds of stuff, but in the end, up on top of the monument is an American eagle proclaiming itself. It has its wings out like that. And to me, that summarizes that we absorb different cultures and it becomes part of us, right? I mean, more bagels are eaten in the United States than donuts. Things become part of it. It changes. Little things changes and we become part of us. So we have here, my character is a Russian immigrant. Almost everybody in my driving cab are immigrants, and that is probably accurate because everyone in the city of Boston, there aren't too many, kind of Caucasians who are still driving cabs. It's the sort of thing that people get, the job that people get when they don't have a lot of skills. They come to the country, but they can learn to drive, and they can they can make some money doing it. Once again, my character wants to have his own cab and his own medallion, which brings me to another point. The word, just like this building, to me has some extra meaning. It's a building. It covers you. People come in and out of it. You can get something to eat there. But it has a significance, and the architecture tells us a little bit of a story. Well, the medallion, even though it's just a piece of metal in the back of the car, or the back of the taxi, if you note the word connotes something precious, right? I mean, it does. A medallion is like a necklace, a thing on a necklace, right? It's something precious, and I think for the people who are seeking what will make them happy, they're pursuing happiness, they are all looking for something like a medallion, something precious. So it is a thing, but it's also an idea, what he's pursuing. I think at one point he wonders how life would be when he gets his medallion, and then he says to himself, this is when the real challenge starts, keeping it, right? It's one thing to go for a goal, you get it, but then you got to keep it. And that he notes that. So my Russian, well, I'm going to read you now from a couple of chapters. And please just put your hand up, interrupt if you have any questions or anything. And if you find this getting a little dull, just kind of let me know. All right? All right, there are 3 sets of characters. It's a little bit complicated. We have, of course, Sasha Denisov, who is our immigrant. He was in the Russian army. He was a Russian special forces called Spetsnaz. He was nearly drafted into the Chechnya War. And this is where he learned some of the things about violence, which unfortunately he'll have to apply to saving his own life. Because this man will have to fight for his life. It's a crime story, and that's one of the things he has to do is fight for his life. The second set of characters are the Mendez brothers, two brothers who come from Bogota, Colombia, and they're criminals, and they work in the drug trade, and they work in prostitution. And one of the things they do, and the way these lives intersect, is that they use taxis to transport their illicit goods or the women. I mean, taxis can go everywhere. It's innocent enough. You know, taxis in a neighborhood, you don't think twice about it, but they're using them to do these deliveries. And they want the same medallion as our hero, as Sasha Denisov. I mean, there aren't a lot of medallions for sale. Usually, by the way, they lease them or rent them. They pay a fee. You know, that's what they do. But there aren't a lot for sale, and he wants to own his medallion. So I have to tell you, that's one of the things that's going to happen, is that they want the same medallion. There's violence. He's on the run. All right, so that's what. All right, so we have that set of characters, Sasha and his taxi drivers. We have the Mendez brothers, and then with the third set of characters is the detectives, Benjamin Schwartz and Alphonse de Natalie. And they're homicide detectives, and they work out of District 1, which is right near Beacon Street. It's right near it's what we call the Government Center area. Used to be Scully Square. That's where they work. And they'll see in a moment they're going to get a call about something. So I'm going to try to bring these three sets of characters together, and we're going to have our Sasha face a challenge of violence. So, and then if you have patience and time, I might read you something a little bit more romantic, because there's a romantic element here. Then Sasha is in love with the wrong woman.
I think every man says that.
Yeah, it's not a unique experience, all right? So, but you're going to meet her. Her name is Ani, and he married her, she married him, to get his green card, all right? I mean, there's some shady behavior here. First of all, she marries him to get a green card and then make a fee. She's an escort, by the way. That's what she is, an escort. She's a beautiful woman. She's an escort. And she works out of a club in Saugus. If you know this area along Route 1 in Saugus, there are clubs. All right? Before I was single, I knew some of these clubs, but there are clubs up there. And she works in one. And he married her. They got divorced after he got his citizenship, which was the deal, but he wants to remarry her, and they still see each other. So his wish, his second dream, other than getting in the medallion, is that he remarries her, and she gives up her life as an escort. And that's, so, all right. So I might read that section where they first meet. All right, so now we're in chapter 1. We're on Summer Street. No, Atlantic Ave, Summer Street. Okay. And by the way, I worked at 245 Summer. So when I came out of the door, when I worked for Fidelity Investments, and I turned to my left, I saw the cabs, and I said to a friend, I'd like to write a story about a cab driver. And I wrote 2 paragraphs and sent it to my friend, and he's in my thank yous, because he said, this is a good idea, you should follow it through. So his name is Jack Howland. Chapter 1, okay. In seawater, sound travels at 343 meters per second. Sasha knew this from his physics class at the gymnasium, what they call high school in the Ukraine. He had fled to the USA from the city of Ostrog with every ruble he had 5 years earlier. He still remembered the physics lesson. Whatever made that sound might be a mile away or right next to him, serrated teeth and a mouth open like an excavator bucket. Wake up, Sasha. Sasha, wake up, said Wally, tapping on the cab window. In the 17th of a 24-hour shift, Sasha Denisov slouched in the passenger seat of his cab. He was parked in a line of taxis waiting for fares next to the rail terminal at South Station, Boston. His jacket hung on the meter, and a Red Sox cap was over his eyes. He dreamed himself in a trench in the Pacific. 10,000 feet of water drove him down into the darkness where the fish carried their own lights. His breathing shallowed from the squeeze on his ribs and lungs. A couple more meters and he would be crushed. Sasha heard the sound again. This time he recognized car keys striking the window of his cab. Sasha, Wake up. It was Wally Tutu, Sasha knew as he came to the surface. Wally drove for the Mystic River cab. His real name was Walter Kibaki. When he started 3 years ago from the slums of Nairobi to the tenements of Chelsea, Walter said to the other cabbies, "Get me drink, Tutu," to whoever went for coffee. "I give you money." The name stuck. "Wally," Sasha said, adjusting his makeshift pillow, ready to plunge in again. "Let me be, I'm on a double shift." Sasha's English sounded American, except his H's, W's, and P's were borrowed from the 21 consonants of the Russian language. Specialists might also catch the Slavic accents of Ukrainian in Sasha's speech. He carried those sounds in his mouth, a legacy. "Sasha," Wally knocked again. 12-hour shifts were common for cab drivers around South Station. That included gassing up, eating, taking bathroom breaks, fixing a flat from nail spills, giving receipts to maybe 50 customers, making change for them, listening politely to them, separating their tips from meter money, 300 miles on a shift. Planes grounded because of weather, Sasha borrowed chains and drove a Wisconsin man to his father's funeral in Vermont through a snowstorm, 500 miles round trip. They made it to the funeral on time. Once or twice a month, Sasha did a 24, 1 day a night straight. The extra money, like the cash from tips, went into a safety deposit box at Cambridge Trust. He was saving for his own medallion for the privilege of operating his cab. "Sasha, help," said Wally. "It's my cab." That was the word, help. Sasha didn't think he had ever heard Wally say it. Through the glass, he thought he saw a welt on his friend's black face, a raised ridge on the cheekbone. Sasha took a swig of coal black coffee. Grabbing his jacket off the meter, he let the door of the cab swing shut behind him. He was awake, nearly so, his heart picking up pace to fuel his legs. Ahead of him, Wally ran past the entrances to South Station, past an office building, that's where I worked, toward the street fronting Fort Point Channel. If you take a right there, it's the South Boston Postal Annex. It's right on that street. But you're facing the channel right there. Sasha saw the spotlight moon reflecting off the water. Wally went straight at the channel, then took a sharp right and left the moon hanging. Their friend Raul Benitez, another taxi driver, joked that Wally's ancestors outran leopards and lions. Raul prided himself and fellow Cubans as being great swimmers. His parents made the 90-mile trip to Florida in rafts, the last 100 yards spent in the water to get away from Fidel Castro's Cuba. Sasha jogged to catch up, turning the corner. Wally's cab idled a foot from the curb, doors open and lights on. 2 people, a man and a woman, arguing in the back seat. Wally lay on the pavement next to the cab. Sasha stopped and took a long breath. This was trouble. So, chapter 2. Any questions, anything? Chapter 2, and we move, I'm going to get a drink. Chapter 2, we move to our detectives. You know, the writer had this problem of getting all his characters together in the first 10 pages. Let's see how we did. Pardon me. Pardon me. The dispatcher's request crackled through the small speaker, and the sun faded. My mother said not to drink fast. Okay. She also said, hold up your hands. Okay, there we go. The dispatcher's request crackled through the small speaker in the sun-faded dashboard of car 2076. Detectives Benjamin Schwartz and Alphonse Donatelli listened to the message. Code 12, South Station, Channel area, possible altercation involving a taxi, license or medallion number to be announced. Code 12 was intentionally vague. Most often it was a noisy disturbance, a party out of hand. Altercation was equally vague, anything from knives, pistols, and fists to a food fight. No one knew if the police would arrive to break up an evening of murder or just fun. Schwartz had visited the dispatcher's station one night and made his way down into the basement. He brought a cup of coffee and a Danish in a paper bag to the person behind the microphone. She sat before the famous green screen, scratched from years of fingernails and pens pointing out details on its scarred face. The lady dispatcher had a voice that remained steady, even soothing, no matter the contents of the announcement: rape, murder, an officer shot or injured. Tonight she had tracked their vintage Crown Victoria as a white dot moving near a larger square labeled South Station. The dispatcher first offered to call transit police instead. Schwartz cleared his throat to get the weariness out of his voice. No, the detective said. Everything outside the station was their jurisdiction, and they'd take it. The detectives were coming off the late shift when they got the call. 5 hours earlier, at 10:32 p.m., they had investigated a shooting in Roxbury. 3 young black men, one of them shot. The detectives knew the names of the streets and corners there, as well as their own neighborhoods. Crawford, Fulton, Pierce Streets, and Drumlin Avenue from Mattapan Square to an enclave of Somali immigrants called Little Mogadishu. The adults, blacks, Hispanics, Haitians, and Somalis, got along fine, but the young, some armed and some in the drug trade, fought over asphalt and cement turf like warring tribes. Denali had stood on the gas pedal down Blue Hill Avenue. Lit by sodium lights, the broad avenues and side streets shone like a night game at Fenway Park. When they arrived after the uniformed patrolmen, they identified themselves as homicide detectives. There was no deceased yet, and an ambulance sped the badly wounded young man to Boston Medical Center. The 2 survivors of the attack were sitting on the steps of a 3-decker. One had been treated for a minor injury, his hand bandaged. The other was shivering from the adrenaline wearing off. The uniforms passed them a couple of blankets. The detectives allowed the victims a half hour to decompress, while officers stood nearby to help keep them from leaving. Meanwhile, Schwartz and Denali knocked on doors. Gunfire had already roused the neighborhood, as well as the half-dozen police cars on the street and the humming generators of the spotlights. In Schwartz's experience, neighbors near a crime scene were usually helpful. Most were frantic for the police to fix their wild streets. Too many gunshots on too many nights, the tired voices of citizens said to Schwartz. His own neighborhood was so quiet that his wife Evie complained about a dog barking too long. Schwartz and Denali walked back to interview the 2 young black men. Up close, they looked maybe 15 or 16. They didn't know much except for the black car, which pulled up beside them, rolled the windows down, and someone inside started shooting. They were too scared to talk now. They would be revisited in a few days. The detectives found the school ID of the kid who was shot. He wasn't quite 15. Denali said, "Christ, it's not safe around here if you're even 14 years old." Back at headquarters, they sat at Schwartz's computer, read from their notes, and typed up their report, incomplete as it was. Denali was faster on the keys than Schwartz, whose fingertips lost their sensitivity from years of diabetic needle pricks. Schwartz is diabetic, type 2 diabetic. The 2 men got along well enough in spite of the difference in ages. They were friends as well as partners. On one assignment, a witness pointed to Denali and asked Schwartz if he was his son. "Yes," he answered. "His wife and he adopted the ugliest baby in the orphanage no one else wanted." Denali laughed. He said his ex-wife would agree with the ugly part. Denali was not just a detective. He was in the National Guard. He did tours in Iraq or Afghanistan. He sent pictures of himself in green camouflage fatigues in 115-degree heat to the department. The Baghdad sunshine lit him up like a floodlight. Denali carried 60 pounds of combat gear, an M4 rifle on a sling around his neck, opaque sunglasses, and a confident smile. While his partner was deployed, Schwartz got cranky, waiting too long for an email response. When the detectives heard the dispatcher's alert, the altercation at South Station, they were headed home, Schwartz driving. They just learned that the shot 14-year-old had made it through surgery minus 1 kidney. A uniform or detective would talk with the boy tomorrow or the next day, and he wouldn't remember much either. In that neighborhood, young men had their own system of justice. It was big on capital punishment. Schwartz looked at his mirrors. No traffic behind, and they were 7 blocks away on Tremont, below the gold-domed State House. Winter Street was empty. Schwartz took this turn fast, tires screeching like cats on the cobbles. He turned on the vehicle's lights and strobes, the illumination reflecting off the storefront windows on Summer Street. At each intersection, Denali hit the siren. Ahead of them stood South Station, 4-Point Channel, and the moon. So now we get to the third set of characters. I'll try to make it short, and then we'll get to the altercation, which shows something about Sasha. So Octavio, all this is happening. Octavio Mendez is in another cab, like 4 or 5 cabs back. So Octavio Mendez heard the commotion from his cab. Something was happening close to the channel. He was waiting in line with the other cabs for more foot traffic from the trains or buses. Up ahead, he saw a short guy leave his cab. By the way, Sasha Denisov is short. Well, you'll see. He's no more than 5'6". So he's short. He saw the short guy leave the cab, letting the door swing shut behind him. The man jogged toward the channel and disappeared around the corner. He noticed a few other drivers rush down the block. "Las peleas," he heard someone yell. There was a fight somewhere. Octavio was resting his eyes, his tired eyes. In the vanity mirror, the whites looked like they were ready to bleed. There had been too much beer the other night, his wide Colombian belt like a dam holding back his gut. Octavio had the radio on. He cheered himself up by listening to AM 1440, Salsa Till Dawn. Outside of the cab, it was quiet, hardly any foot traffic except the commotion. There were few trains and buses until the real morning, not this dark as the devil's heart a few hours after midnight. The pretty time was when dawn dabbled the eastern sky in gray, orange, and red. Only then was he glad to be up so early. Octavio itched to lock the cab and leave for the fight, but his brother Julio had called on his cell and said to stay put. He had pissed his brother off enough lately. He didn't need another reason. Octavio pledged to stop taking samples of the drugs he distributed for his brother. His customers were usually too nervous or wasted to notice he was light. Still, he might get caught, particularly when he came back from deliveries as high as a 747 climbing through the clouds. Instead, he would impress his brother with improving his English and taking courses. And back door opens of the cab. Back door of the cab opened. The dome light, extra bright to count change and embarrass customers into bigger tips, went on. "Put that music down," said Julio, sliding across the vinyl seat. He had a white McDonald's bag in his hand. Octavio slid open the plexiglass partition between the front and back of the cab. You know that the cabs, so many of them were held up a couple of decades ago that they mandated, again, the Medallion system, not Uber, that they put a steel plate on the back of the front seat and a plexiglass which protected the drivers. Okay? Julio put the bag on the passenger seat next to Octavio. Julio was taller than his younger brother, in great shape, more like a V than Octavio, who mostly closely resembled the first letter of his name. Julio wore that nice tweed jacket Octavio liked to borrow. Whenever Julio carried the product, the dope, he also packed a gun. The tail let out the coat on that side. You couldn't notice the holstered .357 short-barreled pistol Julio carried against his ribs. He had been shot years ago. He was making a delivery in Roxbury and was caught by El Ladrón, robbers who would leave his wife a widow. If Julio hadn't been armed, Felisa would have been shopping at Nordstrom's for black outfits. The shooting was one reason Julio sent for his brother in Bogota. Julio was working too hard and wasn't careful enough. So he leaves his brother with this thing and says, "You better take off and do this delivery." So we'll get back. We're going to go to Sasha now. He's turned the corner. All right. This is what's going.
Did you say that he had a bag, McDonald's bag in the
Yeah,
car?
in the McDonald's bag
That
is
was
what.
the
Look, drugs, right? But there's also a sandwich in there,
Oh, okay.
and
All right, just one, just one.
and Octavio, while he's waiting for the lights to change, will be eating because
Okay.
he likes to eat. He likes to ingest. He likes to drink. You know, he's so different from his brother. Who, they're almost like two different personality types. One's like an ectomorph, the other one's a mesomorph. But he's doesn't have a lot, impulse control, and we're going to see later in the book that lack of impulse control turns out to be tragic. So here we go. When Sasha turned the corner, he saw the maroon and white Mystic River cab. Wally's Toyota Camry was smaller than the Sasha's Chevy Malibu. Over the last couple of years, in fact, it was in that picture I showed you of the medallions on the back of cabs. The cab, first of all, the famous Ford Crown Victoria stopped being produced for the police and for taxis. That was the car for decades. All right, so they had to replace it. And the other thing was the cost of fuel. Fuel is getting more and more, was getting more and more. Lately, it's been going the other way, but it's more and more. So the smaller vehicles have been coming into play, and now around South Station, you'll see Subarus, Nissan Maximas, all kinds of little, smaller cars. But there are still a number of Crown Victorias which are used, even a few the police still keep. But for the most part, they're being replaced. So you'll notice that to sit in the back of a Camry is a little smaller than a Crown Victoria, and that's part of the story here. The two people in the back had less room to move about or get away. Wally slumped next to the cab. He was trying to get up, but couldn't, and sat back down, rubbing his eye. He'd been hit again, and the man who hit him was still in the back seat of the cab, slapping the woman beside him. His arm rose and fell like a conductor's baton in waltz time. Sasha motioned to Wally to stay down, and Wally did not need much encouragement. Sasha moved slowly toward the cab. If the couple decided to make up and leave, he wasn't going to stop them. Unfortunately, they stayed. The passenger door was swung wide open, dome light on. Sasha put his left hand on top of the door and looked in. He was nearly 5'8" in his spit-shine Rockports, a little over 5'6" in his socks. Though slim, he worked out with free weights and a pull-up bar in his basement apartment in Cambridge. He also ran around his neighborhood in any weather. Sasha liked the cold. His skin glided over the bones, muscles, and tendons. There was not enough body fat to obscure the mechanics beneath. The man in the back seat was taller and wider than Sasha. His hair looked painted black, and the locks curled against the back of his neck. He looked to Sasha like he hoisted weights not for endurance, but for power. His T-shirt was a size too small, showing the results of his training. The man had made quick business of Wally, who was 6 inches taller than Sasha. He looked drunk or high, eyes wild with anger, and was younger than Sasha by at least a decade. Sasha felt his insides shrink. His sense of self-preservation, its compass, was pointing away from the man, the cab, and the whole incident. He thought of himself back in his own cab sleeping. He needed sleep like a parched man needed water. Anywhere but here, his mind said, interested in preserving itself and the body that supported it. The woman's lip was bleeding, not too bad. Her arm was blue with bruising. She'd been holding it up to ward off more blows. Now Sasha saw the man's tattoos, the crisp professional ones on the neck. But on his hands below the knuckles were crude prison or gang insignias. It was something Sasha dreaded in customers. The letters spelled L-O-V-E on the left and H-A-T-E on the right. The abuser was a righty. Sasha was rusty with violence. While a soldier in the Russian Federation Army a dozen years before, he was a Spetsnaz, Special Forces. They trained him to be a mechanic and driver. He earned his black beret, so they sent him to Chechnya to the war. Spetsnaz gave all officers and men in Chechnya a belt knife. The buckle was the head and chest of a Siberian tiger, the unit insignia, and with it Sasha amused his cabbie friends and his girlfriend, Ani. That was back in his apartment. It wouldn't do him much good here. Knives also meant someone could be cut or killed. Sasha looked in at the couple and said, "Hey," to interrupt the slaps and blows. The woman would have been pretty if her face hadn't been contorted with fear. Mascara was running down her neck along her own neck tattoo. Suddenly, Sasha found himself on the ground next to Wally. The man had hit Sasha with the back of his hand. The hard ridge of his palm slammed into his breastbone, knocking the air out of him. It was the kind of blow that could stop a heart from beating. Sasha's training was perhaps too old to help him much here, and the moon reflected off the briny channel. The man in front of him had enough anger to light up the street like a small sun. Sambo, the mixed martial arts for Russian special forces, involves judo-like moves and breaking an opponent's will. Sasha couldn't do much sambo inside the vehicle. He would have to draw the man out. Sasha stepped back into the open door. Wally tried to catch his breath leaning on the right fender of his cab. He would be of no help. Sasha gestured for Wally to stay put, then turned back into the Toyota doorway and faced the couple. The man threatened to hit Sasha again, this time much harder. Sasha kicked the man with the tip of his Rockport. He caught the side of the man's right foot, close to the shin and knee. The man stopped hitting the woman, turning his full attention to Sasha in the doorway. The woman looked up like a caged animal. She begged the man she called Raphael to stop. At least he knew his name now, Sasha thought. Sasha stepped back onto the sidewalk far enough so Raphael couldn't leap on him. Raphael stepped out of the cab, straightened up, and rubbed his leg. He showed his size and bulk to Sasha. This man had been inflicting pain on others for the past half hour and now was experiencing his own. He glared at Sasha, more nuisance than threat. Sasha looked at the man's hands and feet, not his eyes. These would be sharp points of anger to make him afraid. The man's hands and feet would tell Sasha what he was going to do next. Sasha stayed out of range. From his hip pocket, Raphael took out a black object. At first, Sasha thought it was a comb. Then he saw a Spyderco knife with a scalloped hole. With a flick, the stainless steel blade was pointed at Sasha's gut. The blade was not that long, but that didn't matter. If the knife didn't slice you open like a package, 3 or 4 inches could still find the vital organs inside. Sasha saw that the man didn't think he was much of an opponent. The knife was to scare him away. The woman opened the back door on the driver's side. One stare from Raphael was all it took, and she stopped. But in doing so, he looked away from Sasha. The cabbie stepped in closer. Sasha threw a punch. His gut, buttocks, legs, and back all lined up behind the short strike to the side of the man's throat. The punch drove into bundles of nerves and blood vessels. Sasha was sure the man was experiencing extreme pain. Sasha had been hit in the same fashion during his training. They said he would get used to the feeling of going under and still keep his wits. He hadn't. Raphael gasped and started going down. Sasha stepped in to bend the knife hand back and pull the man forward. The wrist bent like a door hinge. Sasha kneed the man in his pubic bone. He missed, but his knee to his hip was enough to make him sit down. Sasha stepped away as if from a hot stove. While the man tried to clear his head, Sasha grabbed the knife. He broke the blade with his heel against the curb, and he flung the pieces toward the channel. Now Sasha's plan was to get out of there before the man could shake off the blows and fight again. Sasha turned to see the woman leaving the cab to help the man who beat her. Sasha knew Raphael was still dangerous, already recovering. He was suffering more from embarrassment that he was now on the ground and taken by surprise. With new anger to add to his old, he would find a way to grab Sasha and punish him. Spectators came around the corner toward him. No police had arrived yet, but they would soon. "What do we do now?" Wally asked. He stroked 2 small lumps on his face. Sasha's breastbone and his fist both throbbed. "We clean this up before more people arrive, and we have to spend all of tomorrow with the police sorting it out." "And what about the man?" "Drunk. I can smell it on him. Who knows what else is in his veins?" The woman was holding her man and repeating his name, Raphael. She had moved from victim to nurse in a few minutes. Sasha was not surprised. In the back of his cab, he had intervened a few times between couples, arguments that ended with slaps or kicks. Sometimes the injured party or spouse took the side of her attacker once he was subdued. It was just how some people ran their lives. The woman helped Raphael up. He moved towards Sasha, willing to go another round, and Sasha knew the fight would not go as well as before. By then, a small crowd was gathering, hard pulses, and this is Schwartz and Donatelli, of police sirens were coming nearer. When Sasha turned to face Raphael, the couple was gone. Both were wearing fashionable black attire and blended into the darkness near the channel. Wally started to congratulate Sasha, but stopped. They were lucky that it just ended this way. So that's where it ends. Sasha walks back to his cab, and just as I'll leave it right here. They were coming back to the cab, and they hug, and the young Walter Gabaki, Tutu, gets in his cab and goes home to put some ice on his face. And here we go. So they hug. Wally closed the back doors of his cab, got in, and drove away. The few curious cabbies and other spectators left when Raphael and his girlfriend took off. Sasha walked to the corner of Summer Street and turned left. He could see South Station in his cab. He also saw an unmarked police cruiser with 2 men in suits slow down and head to where Wally's cab had been. The police looked Sasha over for sure, but they looked at everyone. They were trying to spook a runner, someone who would take off because he didn't want to talk. Sasha kept walking. He noticed his hands shook when he held them out. Not too bad given what happened. Sasha checked his Red Star watch. More foot traffic meant a bus or train had arrived. It was the last train before dawn, he realized. A couple with suitcases on wheels and leather bags over their shoulders waited near the cab. Sasha jogged over to open the trunk. So maybe we'll stop it right there.